All right, now I know I waited a little while to do this, but well, it was the haves and the have-nots. I mean, I remember doing the part one of the Bobby Brown review. It did pretty decently. I actually didn't think it would get as many views as it did, to be honest. I mean, um, yeah. So I did say in that video, personally, I did prefer seeing part one because I really was more interested in learning more about the height, not the high, no pun intended. I'm sorry. The height of Bobby Brown's career versus the Bobby and Whitney drama and everything with the drugs. I really wanted to know more about who Bobby was with the success rather than, him and Whitney being together. And then obviously me being born in 91, I was more familiar with the drug addict and in a jail, out of jail Bobby Brown than I was the new edition slash don't be cruel Bobby Brown, who I really was more interested in learning more about as a person. But yeah, part two was really good. Very powerful scenes. One of the most talked about scenes was the argument between Bobby and Whitney. I believe that was after the Crack is Whack interview with was it Diane Sawyer? I believe it was Diane Sawyer. And yeah, we did have some new edition cameos in there. I did like that, like when they were on the Heads of State tour, when Ralph and Johnny were on tour with Bobby, and even later on in the film when Bobby Christina passed, when he was on tour, New Edition. And I believe there were a couple other cameos before that, but really the bulk of part two was the entirety of the marriage between Bobby and Whitney. I mean, like the drug use, the fact that he really wasn't doing well in his music anymore, him being a father to Christina. But to be honest, Bobby and Whitney were still going through their addictions and really weren't doing well as parents. And I knew I was going to get torn up during the last maybe 45 to 30 minutes of the actual biopic, because I knew all the deaths would be coming back to back. What was it? His mother, then the following year, his father. And then, of course, Whitney passed, and then his daughter 3 years later. And by the end of the film, it wasn't that I felt bad for Bobby, but I felt proud of Bobby for making it through all that. If I'm not mistaken, he's 49. He's not even 50 years old, but I feel like Bobby Brown has lived like 5 or 7 different lives, the life he lived and, Orchard Park. Then, of course, with New Edition, then when he became a solo artist, then when he got together with Whitney, then when he divorced, he was trying to get his life back together. Now of his new wife and kids. So it's like he's lived so many different lives that it's just crazy to even comprehend. But yeah, it is sad because, Bobby Christina never really had parents. I mean, she was with Bobby and Whitney, but they were so drugged out of their minds that I believe at the time she was being raised by the nannies rather than her parents. Then we saw the trials and tribulations of the different fighting, like the one scene I was talking about, the argument where Whitney was blaming Bobby for her downfall and everything, and then Bobby Christina was in her room listening to the entire conversation. And yeah, I mean, I can get that, but at the same time, both parents both members of the marriage had their issues. Like, they both brought things to the table that destroyed the other's career. Like, I feel like really Bobby put his career on the back burner for Whitney, but at the same time, the drugs and everything, he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing in order to, as Tommy said in part one, towards the end, you're not hungry for it anymore. The reason the Bobby album didn't sell like Don't Be Cruel is because you didn't put the work effort into it like you did on that second album. Second, because King of Stage was the first one. And he was absolutely right. And I mean, it's just sad because there were just so many things I wish were in the biopic. Like, I don't believe we saw the cocaine chicken, the fried chicken with the cocaine, or the Murder Inc. video he did where he jumped out of the planes like, I know you're getting bored dealing with me. That wasn't in there either. I mean, overall, man, it was pretty solid. And while in the first part where it was really about Bobby and his family, and this, his parents and brother and whatnot, in part two, it was really about his own family with Whitney and how that one had more cracks in it than the actual drugs they were doing, because remember, crack is cheap, crack is whack. I make too much money to use crack. But I mean, it is sad to just see it all crumble apart. And here's the part that really got me. And kudos to them for getting the motions in that scene down. I believe it was from Being Bobby Brown, where Bobby was getting glasses and they were doing that. I got my glasses. They work. And that was perfect, just like the actual episode. Before recording this, I actually went on YouTube and found an episode of Being Bobby Brown. I believe it was the final episode. I think there were only like not even barely like 11, 12, or 13 episodes of Being Bobby Brown. And I believe the last episode was a Christmas episode, Christmas with the Browns. I remember the show because I was a kid. I remember when it came out and laughing. I remember watching like my mom, maybe my sister, and just laughing at how ridiculous it was. After a while, I could not make it through the entire episode, folks. I only watched like maybe the first 7 minutes because that show, I believe they even said this. I believe Bobby said this in interviews and whatnot. Being Bobby Brown was an eye-opening experience. That was a wake-up call because America was given a front row seat into how dysfunctional and how bad these two really were. I mean, especially Whitney. It was sad to see the queen of pop and whatnot in that condition. I'm just like, she had no business being in front of a camera. I felt so bad. I mean, I remember being a kid and watching reruns and like, oh, this is funny and whatnot. But now being older and knowing more about the behind the scenes stuff, it was just sad, man. Sad. It's like, what's his face from Everybody Hates Chris? Tragic. But, yeah, so I'm glad that show didn't last too long. I actually went to a couple of different internet, like Wikipedia and a few other places, to see if they ever released the show on DVD. I do believe they did at some point, but then they took it off the market because, to be honest, they wanted to just lock it all in the vault so it would never see the light of day again. And to be honest, I can't blame them. I mean, Being Bobby Brown should be something that should be erased from everybody's memory because that was just such a low point in their marriage, because we all saw how dysfunctional and how bad their addictions had torn them apart. But not too long after that, they got the divorce because I believe, Whitney wasn't ready to give up her addictions, and Bobby, he wasn't. He was pretty much kicking his to the curb, but Whitney wasn't trying to, and that's how they ended up getting divorced. I mean, that was like a major factor, but I'm pretty sure there are other things as well. But yeah, it really hurts. I mean, that's the one thing I'm afraid of when it comes to eventually, and maybe, hopefully, finding the right woman and getting into a relationship and marriage, because when it's an argument, the shit comes out, like the stuff that really hurts. Like, my family told me not to marry you. And then it's like, well, what about the night we met? I was helping you because everybody else was booing you and stuff. So yeah, he's not wrong about that. So both of them had their own, both of them had a role in putting nails in the coffin that was their marriage. I mean, let's just be honest about that. Both were doing drugs, but I believe that in an interview, Ralph or something said a while back that it wasn't until Bobby met Whitney that he started doing the heavy stuff, because, New Edition minus Johnny, because he's never touched drugs. But let's just talk about New Edition, back in their early days and whatnot, reefer and weed and whatnot, they would do that. But in terms like the major, excuse me if I pronounce it wrong, narcotics, that really came when Whitney came into his life. But yeah, it was just sad because they both played a role in that. I do remember, because this was only a few years ago when you think about it, when Whitney passed and Bobby Brown got kicked out of the funeral and whatnot. I remember that. And then later on when Bobby Christina passed, that guy, Nicholas John, whatever his name was, but the guy that was allegedly, involved in the lives of Whitney and Bobby Christina, saying that he was the adopted son of Whitney or some crazy thing like that, then married Bobby Christina allegedly, and then eventually she passed away. I do remember when Bobby Christina was on the Tyler Perry show, For Better or Worse, for only a couple of episodes, because she said, you know what, I'm not ready to be in front of the camera because, too soon after her mom's passing. And I believe the Houstons did the show called The Houstons, and Bobby Christina was on there, and just like Being Bobby Brown was showing how low of a point that Whitney was at, the Houstons did nothing but the same thing for Bobby Christina. And it was just sad to see. That was just exploitation at its finest, or at its worst, if you will. But Yeah, I mean, just even like the simple scenes where Bobby was trying to change his tire because apparently he ran over a nail and he was talking with his dad. I love those quiet scenes. I just love the just getting more scenes like that with Bobby and his family. But, then we get towards the end where it's just like a new beginning, him and his new wife and new family. I just love that he was at the grill. And every little step came on. The one nitpick I had watching part 2, because I knew they weren't going to do this. Bless his heart, Woody did his job. Don't get me, Woody did his thing, but I was waiting for them to put like a fat suit on or something like that, because we all know Bobby kind of blew up, like, in his later tenure. I mean, even at the BET Awards at the end, or the anniversary of the BET, at the end of the New Edition story, Woody was out there doing, My Prerogative and whatnot. And I'm just like, yo, Bobby, he wasn't huge, but he had a gut on him at that point. But in this movie, it's kind of like, I mean, I think he had a little bit of a paunch going on, but he didn't have like a full-on belly and whatnot. I'm just like, man, y'all know he wasn't that skinny. But he has lost a lot of weight in real life currently. But in any case, I did enjoy part 2. I just feel that I did enjoy watching part 1 more. Part 2 was just full of drama. I mean, it was good stuff now, but it was just like, wow. You really saw how dark stuff got. But like Bobby Brown said in an interview, it's like, this is still like a watered down version of what, the intensity of what was really going on. But in any case, I did enjoy it. And as I did a video earlier this week, I really do hope this opens the door to like maybe a Johnny or a BBD biopic in the future. I hope Ralph Tresvant ends up doing an interview on some. We haven't heard from Ralph in a while, and I would love just to get his perspective on different things. Not necessarily about what's going down between New Edition and then him and Johnny and whatnot. No, just more about Ralph's background and more of his solo stuff, because his solo career was arguably the least successful of Bobby, Johnny, and BBD. Because, we really don't know much about his solo career aside from Sensitivity album. I know he had another album after that, but that didn't do so hot, just like everybody else's second album. But I really wish I knew more, like if he did other collaborations with artists and whatnot. But maybe we'll see soon enough. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, folks. What was your favorite parts about the Bobby Brown story, part 1 and part 2? And are you like me, where if you watch Being Bobby Brown now, you look at it in an entirely different perspective from when you watched it when it first came out?